It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorn. My first guest is David Wain. In the late 80s, he was a film student at NYU. Then, with Michael Ian Black, Thomas Lennon, Michael Showalter, and a bunch of other folks, he founded The State. At first, it was a stage comedy troupe. Then, after college, it was a TV show. And it was a TV show that had a huge impact on comedy today. The group was 11 people, 11 college buddies. And they're all still working in comedy now. They did really silly, goofy stuff. I mean, one of my favorite The State sketches, and this is real, is basically just a white tablecloth restaurant and a bunch of waiters wearing white. And then they're all talking in stupid Italian accents about how the Pope is coming. And basically, all that happens in this is people spray red sauce at each other. Like by the end of this sketch, they are literally shooting cannons of ragu onto every white cloth surface in the sketch.
This is a no good. My nice white suit that's around, and the Pope will be here any minute.
Oh. Just be careful with the wine.
Okay.
When The State ended in 1995, a bunch of other TV sort of grew out of it. Viva Variety, Reno 911, Stella. Some of it involved David and some of it didn't. He ended up becoming a director as well as an actor. He directed TV shows like Party Down and Children's Hospital and movies like Wet Hot American Summer and Role Models. His latest film is called A Futile and Stupid Gesture. It tells the mostly true story of Doug Kenney, the co-founder of the National Lampoon. National Lampoon, of course, being one of the most influential comedy outlets of the 20th century. The magazine, that was its original form, included writing from legends like Michael O'Donoghue and P.J. O'Rourke. On the National Lampoon Radio Hour, you'd hear performances from Chevy Chase and John Belushi, Gilda Radner, Christopher Guest. Kenney also co-wrote the movies Animal House and Caddyshack. He had a pretty rough life. At times, he'd work himself to the point of exhaustion. He dealt with drug addiction pretty much his whole life. He struggled to maintain relationships. He died at 33. A Futile and Stupid Gesture takes an honest, sometimes touching look at Kenney's life. But since it's about the guy who founded the National Lampoon, it's also pretty irreverent and a little stupid. If you're looking for tasteless jokes and gallows humor, you won't be disappointed. The star is Will Forte. He plays Kenney in most of the movie. There are also appearances from Matt Walsh, Donald Gleason, Natasha Lyonne, and Martin Mull. Mull plays Doug Kenney too, but he's sort of Doug Kenney now as he would be were he still alive, narrating his own life story. It's a little complicated. Anyway, let's take a listen to a little bit from the beginning of the movie. In this scene, Kenney is introducing himself to the audience, and off camera you can hear my guest David Wain, the director, directing him.
Nobody cares about my family. Everybody has a family.
Okay,
I mean, there's got to be a better way to start a movie.
well, could you just introduce yourself?
My name's Doug Kenney, and you probably have never heard
How
of me.
about, what if maybe you say something like, I'm the creative force.
Creative
that
force.
redefines
No,
comedy."
that's blowing
And-
smoke up my own ass. I can't do that.
I would say you did redefine comedy for a
I
generation.
redefine comedy. Okay, I started the National Lampoon. I did Animal House. I did Caddyshack, and well, that's the main stuff.
What if you say, I was the man who changed comedy forever, but I couldn't change myself?
Really? I was the man who changed comedy forever, but I couldn't change myself.
I like that. That was great.
Oh,
David Wain, welcome back to Bullseye. It's great to have you back on the show.
Thank you. Just hearing that audio clip made me smile.
Well, you like the sound of your own
I'm
voice.
a big fan of me, my work, and the sound of my voice. Those are my three favorite things.
Martin Mull is certainly an entertainer who I'm guessing that you're a few years older than I, and I think you might have experienced the peak of Martin Mull's career and the brilliant things that he did earlier in his career.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
He, when I was a kid, along with Bill Murray, actually, until I was a teenager, was someone where I did not understand why anyone had ever thought they were funny.
Well, his dryness got me so hard. And then when I found out later that he was best friends with Steve Martin, it all kind of made sense to me.
Right.
But he is so great. He's so funny.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to give you an easy question, which is, why did you want to make a movie about Doug Kenney?
Well, I had actually not really known the Doug Kenney story until it was brought to me by Colton and Abood and Peter Principato and John Stern about 8-9 years ago, based on the book about his life. But when I learned the story, I was like, oh, he's that guy. And he is this guy who plays this central role in, as we said in that clip, redefining comedy at a certain moment. And the things he made, particularly for me at my age, Animal House and Caddyshack, were just absolutely bedrock defining moments for me and my sense of humor and the way I looked at the world. And so to see that there's a whole story behind this, and that the National Lampoon was this whole thing that gave birth to the group of people that then went on to populate SNL and then by extension everybody, the whole universe of comedy is just like, of course we want to tell this story. And it's about an interesting, fun time and place, and it's just an interesting story about these two guys, Henry and Doug. And there was a million reasons why it was like, yeah, of course I want to make this movie.
You are part of The State, this comedy group that you started with 10 other people.
Correct.
When you were in college.
That's right.
And you were iconic voices of Generation X.
Okay.
And this is a movie that is about valorizing the heroes and values of the baby boom.
Right.
And I'm not sure I'm on board with that. And I could see you in the making of the movie trying to figure out what your position on it is, or trying to find a way to express a combination of admiration and
distance.
I
mean, sure. I mean, there's the obvious issue that the National Lampoon itself was driven by a very white male misogynist, sometimes racist thrust. The racism was, I think, usually intended in a certain ironic way, but nonetheless, much of what they put out would be considered at least not PC today, if not just truly not funny or offensive. That said, it still was the beginning of the thing. And I think you talk about The State, which we did that in the early mid-90s, was a direct influence from these things, from Animal House, Caddyshack, and all the related SNL, SCTV, that was what we grew up on. And it's not like the first few seasons of SNL were not, they were the same people doing similar kind of thing. And it evolves and it grows and it develops. And that's what, arguably The State was part of that. And then it moved on into other things until today. So that's what the movie's about. The movie's about chronicling where this shift began and where it started, and this particular one guy who was instrumental in starting a certain more daring and less precious look at the generation before him.
Years ago, when the book that the movie is based on came out, I did a whole episode with the author. One of the things that I felt like I took away from reading the book, as somebody who is kind of two generations separated from this.
You're trying to say you're
story.
A lot younger than me, which you are. Fair enough.
We're roughly similarly good looking.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, not a compliment.
Thank you, just the same.
One of the things that struck me was that what these folks invented, and they really did invent it, was kind of a tone, a way of doing comedy that hadn't existed before. How would you describe what that thing is that they were doing that wasn't happening 5 years earlier?
It's a great question. And I think I would have trouble verbalizing it. But I mean, there's certain, obviously everything has its antecedents, of course, but their particular way of doing this snobs versus slobs way of looking at all the structures of society, and their way of also just pushing things to the point of offensiveness to make a point or to express a point of view was new.
Yeah, I mean, the brattiness is what struck me reading about it. And I don't know if brattiness is necessarily the exact word, but just one of the values, and it varied depending on who among these people there were. I mean, one of the famous writers, Michael O'Donoghue, this was like his god,
Right.
But it varied on for other people, was basically just scorched earth, just F them all,
Right.
and we just destroy everything. And it made me wonder, and a lot of great genius came out of that. Really
And that was
amazing
very
things.
influential in a way to Generation X. Like, I had a big bumper sticker on my wall that I worshipped that just said, "Who cares?" And it was like that thing, like, "F it all," And of course, that plays out, and then you grow up and...
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I wondered when I remember reading the book, and I wondered it again watching this movie, is these people are brilliant geniuses. And I mean, I've even, I worked with Ann Beats for a weekend once and really liked her. But I was like, are these people,
Right.
like, is that their whole thing, being an...
Maybe. I mean, it's not their whole thing, but that might have been one of the driving things about them. Yeah. I think proudly so, and in a funny, clever, sometimes genius way.
There's this moment in the beginning of the film where your two protagonists or your protagonist and his best friend are sitting in this office having sold a magazine idea to a publisher.
Yeah.
And they realize they have nothing else besides they're just...
Right. We've all been there 1,000 times.
But not all of us have been there in the way that you personally
Right.
have been there. Like, when I was 22 and just out of college, I was an intern at Alice FM in San
cool.
Francisco,
That's cool.
a morning show,
All right.
Sarah and No Name
Sure.
show.
Good show.
I didn't sell a magazine to a publisher and have to be responsible for adult
Right.
work.
Right.
I was just a 21-year-old.
Well, the parallels of what Henry and Doug did to what we in the state did are many. And, this Doug Kenney grew up near where I grew up in Ohio and moved to the East Coast to sort of try to mix in with the East Coast world as I did, and then met up with these like-minded people in college and did comedy in college as I did. And then after college decided instead of getting a job to keep the thing going, but on a national scale as I did. And that's exactly, and we sort of sweet-talked our way out of the right time and place in MTV and had exactly that scene in the movie where they're like, okay, you have a show now, write sketches. And we're like, okay, let's see, interior house, what do we do? And then you figure it out.
You mentioned that you grew up in the Midwest. Will Forte, who stars in this movie, is profoundly Midwestern.
Yeah.
And Doug Kenney was Midwestern.
Yeah.
Why do you think that was an important part of this story?
Well, Doug himself really held on to that notion that he's from Chagrin Falls, Ohio. He knew how that sounded when he said it, and he often introduced himself saying, Doug Kenney, Chagrin Falls. And I think that I could certainly relate to that. You hold on to those roots that make you something specific and that play in contrast to your, acerbic wit or whatever, and he loved that contrast, and as did I. He was a preppy and a hippie, and he was a Midwesterner, but also an East Coaster, and that contrast, that insider-outsider thing, I understand and very much was similar to that.
When you were a teenager, did you think, I am going to the East Coast to be East Coasty?
Yeah, basically. I mean, I knew from as early as I can think that I wanted to live in New York. I knew that wherever the Muppets were and wherever Saturday Night Live was and wherever Woody Allen was is where I want to be. And so and when I went to New York, I was just blown away by everything there, and the buildings and the Empire State Building, the Automat. And I just knew, I always knew that I wanted to be in New York. And when I went time to look at colleges, I didn't really consider too much anything that wasn't in New York.
How did you feel about it when you got there?
The same. Oh my God. As soon as I got there, I felt for, honestly, at least the first 15 years of living in New York, every day I was like, I can't believe I live in the city. This is a fantasy land. It's amazing that I wake up and that I'm like it's like waking up in Disney World every day for me. That's how I felt, like I live in Disney World.
Did making this story make you think about the ways your life could have gone in the period that was after the state and before your other successes? Because I think one of the interesting things about the history of the state was you had a very culturally significant show on MTV that was reasonably successful by MTV standards and got the opportunity to go to network television. That opportunity almost immediately disappeared, and it kind of left everybody like, oh, wait, now all of a sudden we're all 23-year-olds or however old you were, 24-year-olds, and our careers are over.
I think about this all the time. I mean, I always look at people's careers, and I see that they often have a period of time where they're in the zeitgeist and relevant, and then they keep going sometimes, and it just don't seem funny anymore, especially in comedy, or they don't keep going. And yeah, I thought about that a lot then, and I think that's part of what drove me to make sure to get Wet Hot American Summer done at the time, because the state petered out around 97, and at that point I was pretty down on my luck. Like, I didn't know what to do with my life, and I didn't have another job. No one was asking me to do much. And I
mean, I think Carrie Kenny told me that she was working at the Gap.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in Carrie, though, they had gone on to do Viva Variety at that time. Carrie and Mike Black and Tom Lennon and Ben Grant. And that was that they had that. And we were doing our show Stella at the Fez, but that was 2 hours a week at a nightclub. And I profited off that maybe $50 a week or something. So it just was not sustainable time. And I was weaning away all my savings, that my parents had given me money when I graduated, and I was basically spending all of it, and really not sure what happens next or how to do it, because there's no guidebook like the next thing you do after you finished your MTV series is, so.
Gotten an extraordinary big break? Has it not led to anything?
Right. And it happens all the time, and you see it. And so, but that's kind of when I started going to therapy and trying to figure it out. And it was actually in therapy that I was like, I meditated on it and was like, oh, I want to make an independent film, and I'm going to just get that done no matter what, like by hook or crook. And that's what I did. And so I was like, I'm going to do it right now this summer. And then 3 years later, we did it.
I'm going to play a little bit of this sequence in the movie. It's basically Doug and his partner Henry have put together this incredible team of writers who have absolutely changed the comedy zeitgeist, and the National Lampoon has been this incredible success. And what ends up happening is essentially Saturday Night Live hires all those people, becomes a even dramatically bigger success, certainly in terms of cultural impact. And he's just there like, oh, I invented that. And so this is a scene where Chevy Chase introduces Doug Kenney to Lorne Michaels at a Saturday Night Live after party where Doug has basically been walking around saying hi to all these people who used to be his best friends and coworkers, and now are on to bigger and better things while he's just whatever.
The way you describe it, it's heartbreaking, which it is.
Excuse you, Lauren. It's Doug Kenney from the National Lampoon.
Hi, Doug. Pleasure to meet you.
Thanks. Like the show? It's great stuff.
Right. Well, we do what we can. Doug, you get the kind of comedy we're doing here. You and I, we share a sensibility.
And a cast and writers, yeah?
Spotting talent is the most important job I have. You can understand that.
Yeah.
I was wondering, would you be interested in joining us?
You want me to write for you? That sounds great. Yeah, I'd get to be your employee.
That's a fairly narrow way to put that, Doug.
You think I've flamed out?
No, it's not what I'm saying at all.
Well, it sounds like it is.
What I'm saying is I think you could make this show even better than it is.
Okay, well, I don't need a handout.
That's Armin Weitzman playing Lorne Michaels.
I mean, it is a heartbreaking sequence in the film, especially because this is a character that, as you described, this guy took it upon himself to be number one.
Right.
With no other options available.
Right.
No secondary options available.
And yeah, I hope it comes across, because my feeling is, it's like I feel for Lorne in that scene, because yes, all those people came from Lampoon, but like Lorne's the one who did it, and he put it all together with a bunch of other people from other places and created this own thing that was its own thing. And then, but you can see from Doug's point of view how ripped apart he felt, and it's very similar to how I felt when they did Viva Variety after The State, which felt like a spin-off of The State. It was a spin-off of The State, and but I wasn't included, so I felt like they're taking the train up to stardom and I'm left behind. So I understand that feeling. And then his feeling, Doug Kenney felt, okay, so now I have to leapfrog past magazines, past TV, and make the greatest movie, the greatest comedy movie of all time, which he did.
I think that one of the things that characterizes your work much of your work is deeply collaborative, but from Wet Hot American Summer to Stella to the movies you've made, even the most relatively mainstream movies you've made, is that you find a lot of warm, sincere emotion in almost nonsensical silliness.
I try for that, yeah.
Like if we contrast it with, say, Airplane.
Right.
Like Airplane is so funny. I was just watching Police Squad.
The best.
And I was like, how is it possible that a television show could be this funny 35 years later? This is blowing my mind. But there's no feelings in those. I mean,
right.
Only a kind of mockery of the idea of having feelings, basically. But, they're reasonably pleasant.
Yeah.
They're not mean. But it seems like you, at some point, must have made a choice that your silliness is not tearing things down, and actually that almost nonsensical silliness could reflect actual emotional relationships between people.
Well, I feel like one of the things that I probably more subconsciously thought when I first saw The State perform before I was in the group in 1988 was, this is a brand of comedy that is including instead of saying screw you, and it was still anarchic in the right way somehow. And I cottoned to that, and I guess I think I have a warm romantic streak in me that just comes out. But I also, everything you mentioned, it comes out also because the people I've most closely collaborated with also bring that out in me. In some of the movies, Ken Marino, Michael Showalter, Paul Rudd, they also have that certain warm tone that we all feel like is part of it. But what I also have always tried to do, and I often thought about Caddyshack as the example throughout my whole career, is instead of just toggling between do funny stuff and then now do a serious, heartwarming scene, which just is terrible, basically.
Yeah.
Try to just make the warmth come through secretly, and even in They Came Together, for my money, you watch that movie and it's utter silliness, nothing but jokes, but the warmth of Paul and Amy's connection is still there, and I'm still rooting for them. And if they didn't end up together at the end, I would be bummed, So, and I feel like that little moment of warmth, or the moments of warmth wherever they come, mean a lot to me and make those things last. And I feel like that's part of why, for example, Wet Hot American Summer has lasted where other movies that are just a bunch of jokes don't, is because underneath everything, all the tons of jokes and undercutting in that movie is a genuine sense of nostalgia and heart and care about these people and what they're going through. And the bittersweet ending of that movie means a lot to me, is like where it leaves you with.
I was thinking about, as you were describing that, the huge piles of jokes that are many of your projects, I was thinking about, maybe my favorite huge pile of jokes thing is 30 Rock.
Mm-hmm, sure.
30 Rock has more and better jokes than basically any television show ever
amazing.
created.
Yeah.
I'm going to say probably The Simpsons even included.
I remember I hung out there one day once to watch them do it, and it was amazing. Just you realize when you're there how fast they move, like the scenes go, and you could see that when they're talking anywhere close to normal conversational pace, it seems like glacially slow.
And if there was a reunion season of 30 Rock on Netflix, I'd be watching it so fast, David. Don't get me wrong.
I almost got you wrong. I'm glad you corrected me.
Okay. But I feel like when I think of the relationship that I have with a similar joke pile that came along at a similar point in my life, which is Wet Hot American Summer, the greatest difference is that even though Wet Hot American Summer is even sillier than 30 Rock, I actually I feel like those characters are my friends.
Yeah.
In a way that I don't feel about, and that's as somebody who, I didn't grow up with the things that Wet Hot American Summer is drawing on as a reference, camp movies and that kind of thing. Those were sort of received references for me.
Yeah.
And it seems
but
like
so often it's the received references, like for all of us, that we watch the Bugs Bunny cartoons that are making fun of things you have no idea what they are, but they still are more affecting on people of my age than anybody else even who did get the references.
David, I've seen a lot of your work. In fact, probably close to all of it.
Thank you.
Can I suggest something involving silly mispronunciations of words?
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
All right.
Or like substituting a slightly wrong word for the right word.
Okay, I'll write that down on the list.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm not a filmmaker, David.
Listen, I take great ideas wherever they come from.
Okay.
It's one of my talents.
Thank you, David.
My pleasure.
David Wain, A Futile and Stupid Gesture is on Netflix right now. Go see it. If you haven't seen the new episodes he's created for Wet Hot American Summer, they are really great. You can find them on Netflix, too.